we have talked about stillbirth and met someone who went through it, now it's time to talk about what's being done in Congress to bring stillbirth numbers in the United States down. There are two different pieces of legislation to reduce the number of stillbirths in the U.S. The Maternal and Child Health Stillbirth Prevention Act was introduced in Congress in July 2023 and was signed by President Biden a year later this July. This law amends Title V of the Social Security Act to add stillbirth and stillbirth prevention, something that has been left off since it was written nearly 100 years ago. Emily Price is the CEO of the nonprofit Healthy Birthday, Inc. This nonprofit, with the help of two female representatives, wrote it.
Stillbirth has been taboo for far too long in this country. It's just been something we don't even talk about. And, back when this legislation or Title V was written back in 1935, we think stillbirth was left off because I think back then they thought this just happens, babies just die. And we know now that it doesn't have to be that way in every case, that we can prevent it at a minimum a quarter of the stillbirths that are happening today.
Title V is the single largest funding mechanism to address maternal and child health issues in the United States. Health departments can now use part of the $2.6 billion of Title V block grant funding to prevent stillbirth.
They can now fund things that can be used to educate expectant parents, like Count the Kicks printed brochures and posters that hang in birthing hospitals across the country, or OBGYN offices, or WIC clinics, or doctors' offices all across the country, that now there's no barrier. Once they use their Title V funds to invest in Count the Kicks, there's no barrier that every expectant parent should be learning about the importance of paying attention to your baby's movements in the third trimester and speaking up when you notice a change.
She says this is going to be huge in the fight to bring down stillbirth numbers in the U.S.
This is a call to action from Congress to state health departments to use your existing Title V dollars on stillbirth prevention efforts. It is a crisis. Stillbirth is a crisis that has been ignored for far too long. And so this is a nod from Congress to say, use the money we've given you, almost $3 billion every year. Use some of those funds on stillbirth prevention, because we can make change in this country and we can save lives.
This is the first time in history that Congress has passed legislation to specifically address the stillbirth crisis. The other piece of legislation is the Shine for Autumn Act, which Healthy Birthday, Inc. endorsed and was also introduced in 2023. It was named after Autumn Joy, a baby from New Jersey who was stillborn in 2011. It would authorize $9 million a year for 5 years and federal funding for research, better data collection, and training for fetal autopsies. It is currently in the House of Representatives and has not made its way to the Senate yet. We'll keep you updated about how the Maternal and Child Health Stillbirth Prevention Act of 2024 is helping to bring stillbirth rates down, and we'll update you about the progress of the Shine for Autumn Act as it continues to work its way through Congress. We hope shining a light on stillbirth opened your eyes to a topic that's not often talked about. And if you have been through a stillbirth, we hope this brought you some comfort that there is something being done to stop more of them from happening.